the quiet fold of the Carpathian evening, when the hills turned blue as folded linen and the mist lay softly between the fir trees, a small village settled down around its warm clay stoves. Smoke rose slowly from the chimneys, straight at first, then drifting sideways like sleepy gray ribbons. In one little hut at the edge of the forest, the fire in the oven glowed with a patient orange light, and the house spirit, the old domovyk, sat behind the stove combing his beard with a splinter of pine. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear, one by one, as if someone very gentle were placing them on the sky. It was in that village, long ago, that people still spoke of the greatest trick ever attempted in the mountains. Not a frightening trick, no, more like a strange dream, that wandered in wearing shiny boots and a velvet hat. The man who brought it was a traveling trader named Pan Yarema. He arrived at dusk with a cart covered in blue cloth and silver tassels. His horse stepped lightly, as though it knew all the roads and all the secrets between them. Yarema smiled at everyone and spoke in a voice as smooth as a warm honey. "Good people," he said, "I have brought you something rare. Moonlight gathered from the highest peaks, sealed in glass jars. Keep it beside your bed, and your dreams will shine." Now the villagers were kind and curious. They had seen jars of honey, jars of mushrooms, jars of cherries in syrup, but never jars of moonlight. And truly, when Yarema lifted the blue cloth, the jars glimmered with a pale silver glow. Old women leaned closer. Children blinked with wonder. Even the village cat, who trusted almost nothing, sat down and watched. Yarema asked for embroidered towels, silver coins, warm boots, and once even a fine rooster in exchange for his moonlight. By nightfall, half the village had bought a jar. They placed them on windowsills, beside cradles, near icons, and under beds. But the domovyk in the hut at the forest edge narrowed his little eyes. He murmured to the stove. Moonlight does not clink when shaken. So, when the household slept and the fire sank low, the domovyk padded out beneath the door. Across the yard he went, through soft grass wet with dew, past the well, past the sleepy dog, who opened one eye and decided it was only old household business. At the edge of the woods stood a mavka, combing her long green hair with a twig of willow. She was singing to the fog in a voice so soft it barely touched the air. "Have you seen this Moonlight seller?" asked the domovyk. The mavka smiled. "I saw him by the stream. He filled his jars with water and fireflies." The domovyk nodded. "Ah, a very large trick in very small jars." Together they went to the stream, where the moon floated wide and calm upon the water. There, among the reeds, fireflies drifted like tiny wandering candles, and nearby Pan Yarema slept beside his cart, his velvet hat over his eyes, breathing peacefully as though he had sold the moon itself and had nothing more to do. The domovyk did not scold him, the mavka did not frighten him. Instead, they simply opened the remaining jars and let the fireflies rise free into the night. Up they floated, blinking gently, returning to the meadow, to the reeds, to the warm, dark air. In the morning, the villagers found their jars clear and empty except for a little stream water at the bottom. Pan Yarema woke, saw the open jars, and sighed a long, tired sigh. Then an old molfar came down from the hills, leaning on his staff. His eyes were kind, and his white hair shone in the morning light. "You tried to sell what already belongs to everyone," he said mildly. Yarema looked at the sky, where the pale moon still lingered like a memory. Then he looked at the village, at the towels, coins, boots, and the indignant rooster. One by one, he gave everything back. After that, he stayed 3 days in the village, repairing fences, carrying water, and helping bake bread in the outdoor oven. In the evenings, he told stories beside the fire, and he was very good at that, better perhaps than at selling moonlight. And when he finally left, his cart was lighter, his pockets nearly empty, but his face was softer. As for the villagers, they kept the empty jars. Not because they believed in bottled moonlight, but because on clear nights they placed them on the windowsills, and the real moon filled them for free. Even now, they say, in some quiet Carpathian homes, a jar may glow beside a bed, silver and still. It holds nothing but moonlight, mist, and the calm breathing of the night. And behind the stove, the domovyk smiles to himself, while the stars keep their gentle watch above the sleeping hills. Years pass softly over the village, the way moss grows over a stone wall without asking anyone's permission. Roofs were mended, children grew tall, apple trees leaned deeper over the paths, and the moon kept returning to every window, as if it had never heard of being bought or sold. Yarema did not become rich after the affair with the jars, but he became welcome in many places, which, in the end, warmed him more than coins. He traveled from valley to valley with his little cart, not to trick people now, but to carry useful things: needles, ribbons, salt, clay whistles, candles made by an old beekeeper, and tiny carved horses for children who slept with their hands curled under their cheeks. Whenever he came to a new hamlet, someone would ask, with a smile hidden in the corner of the mouth, "And tell us, good man, do you still sell the moon?" Yarema would place a hand on his heart and sigh as though wounded. "No," he would say, "the moon is a poor customer. She never signs papers and pays only in silver light." Then everyone would laugh softly, not unkindly, and make room for him near the stove. One autumn evening, when the Carpathian forests were copper and gold, Yarema climbed a narrow road above a river that whispered between dark stones. Mist slept in the hollows. The fir trees stood quiet, their branches heavy with dusk. He was older then, with silver in his beard, and his cart creaked like an old song. At the top of the hill he found a lonely hut with a blue-painted door. Smoke rose from its chimney in a thin, peaceful thread. Beside the threshold sat a black cat with green eyes, watching him as if it knew every bargain he had ever made. Yarema bowed politely to the cat. "I have no moonlight for sale," he said, "only candles and combs." The cat blinked once. From inside came a woman's voice, low and warm. "Then come in, traveler. A man who knows what he does not own may sit by my fire." Yarema stepped into the hut. It smelled of dried mint, wool, and warm bread. In the corner, beside the stove, he noticed a tiny pair of felt boots, too small for any child, too neat for a mouse. Domovyk lived here, he understood, and a well-treated one. The woman poured him tea from mountain herbs. She was a Mulfer's daughter, people later said, though she herself never claimed such a thing. Her hair was braided with a red thread, and around her neck hung a small pouch of lavender. They spoke quietly while the night settled around the hut. Outside, the forest breathed. Somewhere far away, an owl called once, not sharply, just enough to remind the world that darkness had its own gentle keepers. The river continued its patient murmuring below. The woman asked Yarema about roads, markets, storms, and villages. At last she asked about the greatest trick he had ever seen. Yarema smiled into his tea. "I once tried to sell Moonlight," he admitted. "I know," she said. He looked up. The cat stretched. The felt boots near the stove shifted by themselves, almost shyly. The woman's eyes shone, but not with mockery. "That was not the greatest trick," she said. "The greatest trick is when a person believes he must own the beautiful thing in order to enjoy it." Yarema sat very still. The fire in the stove gave a small golden sigh. A coal settled. Shadows moved slowly over the clay walls like soft wings. He thought of all the jars on windowsills, all the faces lifted toward the night, all the coins he had once believed could weigh the moon down. And he felt not shame this time, but a looseness in his chest, as though some old knot had finally untied itself. Before he slept, the woman gave him a blanket smelling faintly of thyme. Yarema lay on the bench near the stove, listening to the cat purr and the domovyk pad about in its tiny boots, checking the corners, guarding the quiet. Through the small window, the moon rose without a price, without a promise, without a lid. It entered the hut gently, touched the cups, the table, the sleeping traveler's hands, and rested there like forgiveness. Yarema slept a long, slow sleep, the kind that comes after wandering roads and carrying too many thoughts in one's coat pockets. In his dream, he stood again beside the river where the mist lay folded over the reeds. But this time he held no jars. His hands were empty, and the moonlight passed through his fingers like cool milk, leaving nothing to keep and nothing to lose. On the far bank, the willows bent their silver heads. Among them moved the pale shapes of rusalki, not laughing loudly, not calling him away, but combing their long hair with reeds and humming a tune as old as rain. Their song had no words. It rose and fell gently, like a cradle being rocked. A small light blinked near his feet. One of the poterchata, no bigger than a loaf of bread and wrapped in a glow like evening fog, looked up at him with round, drowsy eyes. It pointed toward the hills. Yarema followed. The path in the dream climbed without tiring him. It wound through dark firs and mossy stones, past fern leaves beaded with dew. Somewhere in the forest, a lisovik leaned against an oak and counted pine cones into his beard, losing count each time an owl blinked. He gave Yarema a nod, the kind one gives a neighbor at dusk, and went on counting, untroubled. Higher in the hills, where the Carpathian wind smelled of juniper and distant snow, an old Molfar sat by a small fire. His cloak was patched with pieces of cloud, and his hat had a feather that moved, although there was no breeze. "You tried to sell what cannot be sold," the Molfar said, warming his hands. Yarema lowered his head. The old man smiled softly. "Many have tried. Some sell luck in a sack, some sell tomorrow. Some sell youth, though they themselves cannot find where they put theirs. But the world is kind in its quiet way. It lets people learn slowly." The fire did not crackle. It only glowed red and gold, like the heart of a sleeping apple. "What should I do now?" Yarema asked. The Molfar took a pinch of ash and let it drift into the air. The ash became tiny moths, then tiny stars, then nothing at all. "Walk lightly," he said. "When you see beauty, do not close your fist around it. Sit beside it. Let it sit beside you." Then the dream thinned like mist in morning. Yarema woke before dawn. The hut was quiet. The woman slept behind a curtain. The cat had curled into a round gray moon at his feet. Near the stove, the domovyk's felt boots stood neatly side by side, though the domovyk himself was nowhere to be seen. Outside, the world was blue and still. Yarema rose carefully so the bench would not creak. He stepped outside and breathed the cold, clean air. The last moonlight was lying across the yard, pale and gentle, and beyond the fence the fields waited under a soft veil of fog. He took the little bag of coins from his coat. It was not as heavy as it had once been. Many coins had gone to bread, roads, taverns, and foolish hopes. Still, some remained. He placed them one by one on the windowsill of the hut, not as payment for moonlight, not as payment for forgiveness, but as thanks for the blanket, the fire, and the quiet. When he turned to go, he saw the gray cat watching him from the doorway. "Tell her," Yarema whispered, "that I will remember." The cat yawned in a way that might have meant, "People rarely do, but perhaps you will." Yarema smiled, pulled his coat close, and walked down the road. The village below was just beginning to wake. Thin smoke rose from chimneys. A rooster considered singing, then seemed to decide the morning could wait a little longer. Frost silvered the thatch roofs, and the first golden line of sunlight touched the church cross. At the well, Yarema found 3 of his old customers standing with empty jars. They looked at him quietly. For a moment, his heart tightened. He imagined anger, hard words, the old shame returning like a cold wind. But the women did not scold. The oldest one, whose jar had once sat by her icon corner, lifted it and said, "It still catches light nicely." Yarema nodded. "It does," he said, "but you must leave the lid off." The women looked at him, and then one of them laughed very softly, not to wound him, but because morning had arrived and the world, despite everything, was still strange and tender. From that day on, Yarema no longer sold moonlight. Instead, he became a mender of small things. He fixed cracked bowls with resin and patience. He repaired window latches, patched lanterns, and showed children how to polish jars until they shone like little ponds. Sometimes on clear nights, villagers brought their empty jars to the meadow beyond the last house. They set them in the grass, open to the sky, and sat together wrapped in shawls and sheepskin coats. No one claimed to own what filled them. No one counted coins. The moon poured silver over everything equally. The roofs, the road, the old well, the sleeping dogs, the quiet hands resting in laps. And if a traveler passed by, he might see at the edge of the forest a tall chugaister swaying gently between the trees, as though dancing to a song too slow for ordinary ears. He might glimpse mavky sitting on mossy stones, smiling without mischief. He might hear the domovyki in warm huts turning over in their little corners, pleased that the night was in order. Yarema would sit among the others, his old selling bag folded beneath him like a cushion. Above, the stars were bright and patient. Around him, the people breathed slowly. The jars glimmered, each holding a reflection that belonged to no one and comforted everyone. And when sleepiness came over the meadow, it came softly. One by one, heads bowed, voices faded, the grass cooled, the moon climbed higher, calm and unhurried, keeping watch over all things that need not be bought, nor captured, nor explained. Yarema closed his eyes. In the silver quiet, he felt the world beside him, and that was enough.